All right.
Well, everyone, welcome back to a very exciting episode of the Storybox podcast. Today, my friends, we're going to learn about evolutionary biology and more specifically how our body works, how our immune systems work, how our metabolisms works, and so much more. With my guest today, his name is Dr. Herman Pontzer. Now, for those of you that don't know who he is, he's an evolutionary biologist, which is basically the study of human beings, which I find very fascinating. He also researches how our deep past shaped the way our bodies work today. He's written a book called Burn, The Misunderstood Science of Metabolism. I've heard several conversations about this, and trust me when I say it, we've been lied to for such a long time. And they're very, very interesting lines of thought, which I cannot wait to dive further into today. Dr. Herman, can I welcome you so much to the Storybox podcast today?
Oh, thanks for having me on. I'm excited for the conversation.
I'm very excited for this conversation, and your bio is a lot longer than what I just read out a moment ago, which we will unpack further in this conversation, no doubt. But my very first question for you is a question I love asking all my guests at the very, very start, which is, what does success look like for you?
Oh, that is the question, isn't it? Right? Because if you don't know where you're heading, then how do you get there? For me, success has meant having enough sort of professional success and being given enough brain, to be able to do what I want to do and chase my own interests professionally, set my own schedule, and to have, both the kind of time flexibility and enough, financial flexibility to be able to do that. And so, from that perspective, I feel I've been very successful because it's really hard to make it go in academia. And so, I consider myself a pretty successful, successful person in that regard.
Has that changed for you over time?
Well, I didn't really have a strong sense of where I wanted to go professionally or even in broader terms growing up. And so it wasn't like, well, if I had to be a doctor and if I didn't do that, I was going to be unsuccessful, or I had to be a professor. If that didn't happen, I was going to be unsuccessful. As it got more clear to me what I wanted to do with my life and what I wanted to pursue in terms of research, doing science and teaching about it and writing about it, then, okay, well, if I'm going to do that, then I want to be a professor. If I'm going to be a professor, I want to get tenure. And then, then you kind of figure out where you are and the structure you're in. But it kind of developed, I've been following my nose, I think, for most of my adult life. I've been lucky to have that flexibility. So, yeah.
So why biology? Why the interest in, I guess, evolutionary biology more specifically? Because you're pretty much studying a broad range, right? You're studying humans.
Yeah. Well, I can't think of a more fundamental question. Sort of how did we all get here and what's it all about? People have been asking that question since they've been able to use language, I think, maybe before. And I took a intro to human evolution seminar in undergraduate in university with Penn State, my first semester there. And man, it just pulled me out of my skin. The whole perspective of doing evolutionary biology or evolutionary anthropology and focusing on humans is to completely pull yourself out of yourself. And from a distance, ask, why is normal? Why is it normal that we've got walking around on two legs with naked skin and these big brains and using sound to communicate and having the abstract thoughts and, why and how? And that's just, that's the question, it's a way of asking about the meaning of life, but with maybe a more sort of articulated set of questions within it. So man, once I realized that people did that for a living, I thought, oh, that's for me.
They're massive questions and you can spend pretty much your entire life trying to answer them, but do you have a better understanding now of where we came from, how we've evolved and why we have evolved into being, I guess, the kind of people that we are today? And is it a good thing that we've evolved into the kind of people that we are today?
Yeah. Well, so that's interesting. You use the word good. I don't know that science can tell us anything about morality, right? That's why you got to have the ethicists on board and the humanities background on that too. I imagine any species thinks it's probably pretty good that it evolved, the most dangerous animal on the planet, are probably pretty, if they could be asked, would be happy to tell you that it's good they evolved, where would all that malaria go if it weren't for mosquitoes, Sure. No, I think I do have, personally, I have a better handle on it because I've been working on this my whole life. I think as a field, we have a much better handle on it, even just over the last decade or so. The research just keeps on accelerating. And both from the fossils and the genetics and the kind of things I do, physiology and working with living populations around the globe and living other, non-human primates around the globe, I think we have such a more rich understanding of where we've come from. I'll say this, I think it's a hopeful story. I think it's a really hopeful story because what separates us, as I've come to appreciate it, from the other apes is how social we are, how much we share. Might doesn't always make right with humans. It does in a lot of other species, but for us, it's a lot more to do with building networks and building alliances and friendships, sharing what you've got. Most other apes don't share. So, I think there's a lot of hopeful messages there that I do think are good.
Do you think, or do you agree with this idea that humans today have become, I guess, detached in a way from other people?
Detached from other species, maybe. Yeah. Well, I do. Yes, absolutely. I mean, just as simple as you and me sitting here in our buildings, right? We don't live outside anymore. And we used to. I work with populations in northern Tanzania and northern Kenya and colleagues and partnerships with projects all over the globe with people who still spend most of their life outside. What a quaint idea. Even a couple generations ago in the United States, 70% of people were farmers. So you spent most of your day outside. Yeah. Today, I think you spend 90% of your time indoors. And even more than that, if you count cars and that kind of thing. So absolutely, just physically, we're separated from the outside. And then forget about, if you walk outside your door, can you name the trees? Not like Jim and Bob and Larry, but can you name the species, right? Can you name can you name the birds? Can you name, what are the animals that are, most people don't know. Maybe you do, but most people don't. Much less paying attention to seasons so, that kind of thing. Absolutely, we're detached. It's a shame, I think. I think we lose a lot from that.
I can only name the most annoying animals, the annoying birds.
Sure.
This is probably another big question. And we could spend a little bit of time trying to unpack it. But how does the human body really evolve? And how long does it normally take for us to go from one place to the next place and so forth?
Well, evolution can kind of happen fast or slow depending on how strong the pressures are to shape a species over time. Mostly it works really slowly. If you were to hold hands, with your mom and she to hold hands with hers and onward and onward and onward, right? As you and it's about a meter per generation, right? Let's say. Well, how many meters until you're into the Stone Age? Right? Not many. It's about 25 years a generation. So 4 generations per every century. So 40 per every 1,000 years, right? So 400 per every 10,000 years. So 400, I probably did the math wrong, but you see my point. Very quickly, before you wouldn't be out of Sydney. You wouldn't be at city limits before you're back to, the early Paleolithic. So in some sense, it's really slow because every one of those daughters and moms is the same species and recognizes each other as part of the same family. But you go back far enough, you're probably not even 100 kilometers away and you're holding hands with something that looks like an ape, right? So it's mind-blowing. In some ways, it's very slow. In some ways, it's very fast. We know that we came from an ape-like thing about 7 million years ago. And for the first 4 million years, we're very ape-like. What's the only thing that's sort of human about those early ancestors is they're walking around on 2 legs. And the canine teeth are a bit smaller. If you notice chimpanzees, for example, have big canine teeth. Orangutans have big canine teeth, the males especially. But otherwise, we're kind of walking around like 2-legged apes. And then around 2 million years ago, 2.5 million years ago, there's a real shift in the way that hominins, and that's the catch-all for our ancestors and us too. It's a group of species. Hominins change, some of them, not all of them, some change the way they're getting their food, and it changes to a hunting and gathering strategy.
Yeah.
And that's really where things take off, and then things accelerate actually quite rapidly over the last 2 million years, and end up in this weird, sweaty, hairless, big-headed thing like you and me.
Do we know exactly why it takes, say, for example, millions of years and then it speeds up rapidly? Or is that something that we still are trying to work out?
So there's no blanket answer for that for all species. Crocodiles have been the same for hundreds of millions of years, for example. Sharks have been the same since the Permian. There's 300 million years. In our case, the process is always the same. When environments push hard on a species, and by push hard, we're saying there's a lot of individuals don't make it, don't grow up, and don't have kids because they're not a good fit. They don't have the right fit.
Yeah,
we call it fitness. Their bodies aren't the right physiology, whatever. It's not calibrated well to the environment. When the environment's pushing hard on you, species tend to evolve quickly. And so, or when a kind of a new opportunity, a new niche opens up, and it's sort of a race to exploit that new niche, then you have rapid evolution that way. I think in humans, in our case, the niche that opened up was that hunting and gathering niche. It's there, you kind of hit on this behavioral change. And now it's such a winner because, you sort of diversified your portfolio. You're not just getting plant foods anymore. Now you're also getting animal food. So it's this mix. Well, gosh, now no other species does this, where half the individuals go off and get one kind of food, half the other get a different kind of food. And then it only works because you share, right? I like to, when I teach this stuff, I like to point out to students, it's the magic of hunting and gathering isn't the hunting or the gathering. It's the and, right? It's how you put it together. Well, now you can get these really nutritious big game meals, but it's risky. You're not going to get that every day. And the reason you can afford to take the chance is that you've got plant foods every day, which are much more dependable.
Yeah.
And then the only way to beat that. So think about what that is. That's now you've got to share. You've got to figure out how to get all kinds of different foods. You got to figure out the social element there. You got to figure out the foraging element. And there's a premium on smarts, right? There's a premium on culture. There's a premium on behavior and working together and cooperation. And evolution is just pushing hard, right, towards us, which is this big socially brained thing. And every generation, the ones who are more social, bigger brained, smarter, do a little bit better, and it just runs away, and you end up with us.
If we look at the past and how our ancestors used to eat, and we look at, I guess, the notion of apes and the way they ate, and even today, right, you can see apes, they eat predominantly a fruit and vegetable diet in seasons. Was that the same back then? And what can we learn about our diet today compared to the diet? This is probably a wide-ranging question.
Yeah.
Compared to back then, have we evolved to basically obese people?
Well, yeah. So that's a great set of questions. It's one thing we worked on a lot in my group. I think it's a really fascinating question to ask. The one thing I would note is that unlike all the other apes, I mean, there's so many things that set us apart, but one of the things I think is really important is we have the flexibility. Both our bodies are flexible enough to do it and our minds are flexible enough to figure it out to be successful anywhere on the planet, right? There's no ecosystem that humans haven't figured out how to live in, hardly at all. And what that means is that diversity of ecosystem becomes a diversity of diet, right? And so there is no one way that humans eat. Right. That's a red flag. Anybody who's trying to sell you a paleo diet, right? For example, there's two kind of ways of thinking about paleo diets. One is, well, I want to get back to whole foods, non-processed stuff in the ways that my grandparents ate. And okay, I get that. I'm on board with that. Yeah. But there's another weirder version of paleo diet world that becomes, this is the one way that humans used to eat, right? Here's what was on the menu. And that's not right. Because we know that when we look across cultures, even just in the recent past, and certainly in the archaeological record, yeah, we eat everything that's around, and it's usually a balance of plants and animal foods. And yeah, so that's what I would take from that, is not that there's one way to eat, but that we're able to thrive on a lot of different diets.
Why is it that we look at apes and past apes in terms of looking and seeing whether or not it is, I guess, comparative to humans? Why is that?
Well, so, just like if I want to understand where you come from, I might want to understand your family.
Yeah.
Right. Or take my example, if you look at my refrigerator right now, it's full of mustard and pickles and beer and sauerkraut. And there's a reason for that. It's because I'm from a very German family in Western Pennsylvania, right? So if you wanted to understand something about me behaviorally, where I'm from, the kind of foods I eat, it would be helpful for you to know that I'm German and that there's a history there, right? Now, if you go to Germany today, those aren't my ancestors. Okay, of course they're not. My ancestors lived hundreds of years ago in Germany, but they still hold on to some of the traits culturally that kind of shed light on me. And so what's interesting about my fridge isn't necessarily the mustard and the pickles and the beer. What's interesting is the chicken stir fry that's there, because I'm married to a woman who grew up in an Asian American household, right? So that's what's changed in my cultural life is the addition of Asian food. Kind of a silly example, but you get the point. So when we want to understand humans, right, we want to understand the apes first, because that's where we came from. And the stuff that we share with them, the fact that, for example, we don't have tails, right? Neither do the apes. Well, then that's not something special about us. That's all apes are like that. Or the fact that we eat plant foods. Well, all apes eat plant foods. So that's not something that changed. But we hunt a lot, and other apes don't hunt much. Chimps will hunt monkeys a little bit, but nothing like we do. And so that's changed. Our cultural abilities have taken off, right? And so that's why we understand the apes, because that's where we're from. And that tells us sort of the stuff that we've evolved out of. And it gives us a baseline to compare ourselves.
How about looking at, say, an ape's metabolism and their overall health, like the kind of diseases that humans have today? Do apes have the same sort of diseases?
Apes don't have them in the wild, and they don't even have them in the zoos as much. Apes do get a kind of heart disease in zoos, but they don't get the kind of heart disease we do. It's actually etiologically a different disease. But they do tell us about where we come from in terms of our metabolism. So humans, for example, one of the things we've discovered in my work is that humans have an accelerated metabolism. We burn more calories per day. And not just because we're more active, but because of things like having a big brain that burns a lot of calories. Our bodies are just built to burn more calories a day than other apes are, right? So that tells us, okay, there's this baseline that apes are at, and we were accelerated from that. Well, there's a story there to understand then about how that evolution happened. I think if the story about obesity today, and where we understand that from that, how we understand that with apes as a reference point, is this: apes in a zoo, chimpanzees in a zoo, are only about 10% body fat, right? I mean, that's Olympic level stuff, right? And unless you're either an Olympic athlete or malnourished, right? So we've actually, I work with hunter-gatherer populations and farmering populations and other traditional groups. Even in those populations they don't have obesity, but healthy men and women in those populations have, in the teens of percentage of body fat for men and 20-some% body fat for women. That's typical. It's normal. So that tells us, okay, humans are actually evolved to put on more fat than apes are. Yeah, we're evolved to put on fat as that reserve. Maybe that goes hand in hand with the faster metabolism, right? Because it's kind of a reserve tank. You're going to burn the engine faster. You want a big reserve tank. Maybe it's part of that. Who knows? We could try to understand that in different ways. But so that's probably the interesting comparison there in terms of apes versus humans in terms of obesity.
So why is it that, I guess, humans become obese in the first place? Is it because of majority of us being overindulgent in particular foods and just eating too much fat?
Yeah. Well, we're eating too much. So so here's what we know about obesity from my work and others. It's not a question of not burning enough calories, because actually when you look across populations, no matter how physically active or inactive populations are, they're all burning about the same number of calories a day. So your body's adjusting metabolism to keep that in a pretty narrow range. So it isn't that we're falling down in terms of calories burned. Instead, we must be falling down in terms of calories consumed. We're messing that up. We're eating too much. And then the question becomes, well, why? And there's lots of ideas out there. Some people want to blame fats. People want to blame carbs, and I think the best evidence for this is modern ultra-processed foods. These sort of overly engineered, focus group tested, literally engineered to be overeaten foods that just, they fool your brain, right? So your brain is really good about matching the calories you bring in and the calories you burn out. It's incredibly good at that, actually. It's a hard job to do, and we all do it incredibly well. But in modern food environments, a lot of us, our brains get fooled and they make a mistake, a little mistake. We're talking less than 1% a day on average. And it tends to over consume. And what that does is you gain a couple pounds a year. And by the time you're 40 years old, you have a problem.
Yeah. What are some of the cardiometabolic diseases that do affect a lot of people today? Is it more?
Oh, yeah. I mean, so from heart disease, diabetes to stroke, kidney disease, those are in the kind of realm of cardiometabolic diseases. And all of those are exacerbated by obesity, that you're much more likely to fall ill from any of those things if you're obese or overweight. Those are the number one killers in the planet, on the planet. It used to be 100 years ago, we were dying from infectious disease as a species. That's what would get you. Today, it doesn't matter if you're in a rich country or poor country, you're most likely to die from one of these cardiometabolic diseases.
And that all came from obesity.
Well, it's all from the same root problem of having poor diet, and activity plays a role there for sure. Activity is important. Exercise is important for example, preventing heart disease, helps prevent some cancers. And so diet and exercise, this sounds like the same old diet and exercise story. Yeah. The twist here, the important thing to understand is often it's talked about in terms of, is if you don't want to watch your diet, you can exercise more. You can earn your donuts. Or if you don't want to exercise, just watch what you eat. And what we're learning is, no. These are two different tools for two different jobs. Diet is your best lever to pull for weight loss or weight maintenance, I should say. And exercise is important for everything else. And that, the diet and exercise combo is why groups like I work with, like the Hadza hunter-gatherers in Northern Tanzania, they don't get heart disease. They don't have diabetes, and they don't have obesity either, and it's not because they're working hard to avoid these things, but they just have it woven into their lives, good food and good, daily activity.
And I listened to your episode with Simon Hill, and I heard you say that the rate of living for the people in the Hadza tribe is a lot lower compared to people in the West, yet they don't have, say, heart disease, they don't have Alzheimer's, they don't have any of these major issues that we're suffering with today, yet we kind of live a little bit longer. And I was always curious, why is that? Like, can we narrow down the reasons to why, say, for example, the Hadza don't live as long, yet they don't have all these diseases?
Yeah, for sure. So that's often a kind of, it's difficult to reconcile. Two things. One is that, we'll simplify it even further. The main thing is that you and I have access to antibiotics and vaccines. Really, it's as simple as that. And so we've removed infectious disease as a major killer in industrialized countries. And they cut down people in places without good medical care, especially when they're kids, right? Babies and young infants are the most vulnerable. Older folks are also really vulnerable to this, right? I mean, we know this. Yeah. The difference is that when, I've got two little kids, when my kids were sick with 100 and some degree fever, 39 degree fever, I could take them to a hospital and get them an antibiotic, right? But you can't if you're in a Hadza. So that's why our average life expectancy is low, because you have to, adding up all of the ages of people who died, there's so many children that it pulls the age down.
Yeah. I think you're right with the vaccines and hospitals and modern medicine. I think it's come a long way over the course of many, many years in learning about these diseases, yet we still haven't been able to find really a cure for Alzheimer's, or I guess, do we have a cure for diabetes, or is that still on the cards too? I don't know what's going on there.
Yeah, Alzheimer's is tough. That's probably going to end up being, the prevention is better than a cure, although we still don't really have a great mechanism for it. So it's hard to know how to prevent it. But when we get there, I bet it's going to be a story about prevention rather than curing it. Yeah. For diabetes, we have some good tools that work. And actually, for obesity in general, there's a whole new class of drugs that seems to work really well. And I don't have any investments or anything like that. I'm not trying to sell anybody any drugs at all. And it'd be better if we just didn't have the problem in the first place. But there's a new class of drugs that they call GLP-1 receptor agonists that people lose a lot of weight, and it seems to be pretty sustainable. Comparable to sort of bariatric surgery levels of weight loss. So we're going to get there. When is a good question, right? I mean, everybody always thinks it's going to happen tomorrow, but we'll see.
Yeah, it kind of feels like to me, with all the technology and the modern medicine that we do have and the advancements that we've made over just a short period of time, you would think that maybe we were just around the corner from it, or we'd be there. But I'm curious about the people of the Hadza tribe. I mean, they're living the way they've been living for goodness knows how long. If they do end up with some infectious diseases, are you able to help them in any way to heal them from those diseases?
Yeah, I mean, when we're there, it's a partnership. First of all, it's a wonderful community of folks, and we have always tried, and researchers have been working with the Hadza for a long time, because it's so rare of an opportunity to work with a hunting and gathering group. And so, we're not unique in this as researchers. There's other groups doing this too, but we have tried really hard to make it a two-way street, to make it a partnership. We started a charity that people should know about. It's called the Hadza Fund, HADZAFUND.org. And it's a charity registered here in the States. And we have Hadza partners as well. And it's a way that we try to get medical care. We run a bush ambulance for the Hadza who are really sick and need to get out to hospital. There's really not a lot of good ways for them to do that. And so we try to do that. And when we're there, of course, in a Hadza camp, we do what we can to help. But sure, yeah. But it's still, that's when we can do it. And it still is hard for them, to get as easy access to, they don't have as easy access as we do, of course, to any of that stuff.
For those people that don't know who the Hadza are and what their lifestyle entails, would you be able to share some stories for us?
Yeah, that's right. So the Hadza are a community. It's a culture of hunter-gatherers in northern Tanzania. So they live in the sort of open, arid savanna landscape, lots of acacia trees. It's a really intact ecosystem. You've got elephant and lion and antelope and everything else out there. And they don't have any crops or any domesticated animals or anything like that. They hunt and gather wild foods off the land, like they've been doing for, like you say, we don't know how long, thousands of years perhaps. And the men hunt with bow and arrow. They make themselves. They have sort of small axes or sort of hatchet size axes that they'll use to chop into trees to get wild honey. That's another big thing that they eat is honey. Women will gather plant foods, like wild root vegetables, berries, that kind of stuff. And there's, no electricity, no running water, nothing like that. They live in grass houses in the middle of the savannah. And
how many times have you actually been there and lived with them?
Oh, a half dozen times, I suppose, something like that over the last decade or so. Has it been that many? Something like that. Yeah. Yeah. I go with Brian Wood, what's that now?
Have you been invited to go hunting?
Yeah, we've gone on just one of the things that we often do when we're there. So I work with Brian Wood, who's at UCLA now. He's probably spent more time in a Hadza camp than in his own house the last 2 decades. He's a real Hadza expert. And Dave Reichland as well. He's another physiologist like myself. But yeah, when we're out there and we're not in camp doing some kind of physiological measurements, like we'll do, blood pressure monitoring or, that kind of thing. But if we're not doing that day, then yeah, we go out and follow the women out gathering. We follow one of the men out hunting, and it's amazing. I mean, it's amazing. Yeah, it's a lot of walking, as you can imagine. You see a lot of country, and it's just really special, and they're so generous and wonderful to invite us in and work with us like that. But it's really special. Yeah.
Are you game enough to eat their food too?
Yeah. I mean, we don't make a habit of it. We don't sort of, depend on them or anything like that. We don't want to mess up. This is the tension of doing any anthropology in this sort of context. You want to be there, you want to see it, you want to kind of embed, but you don't want to muck things up, right? You want to see it as it would be if you weren't there. Of course, it can't ever really be like that. You're always going to be there, but you do the best you can. So, but sure, I've tried zebra, and I've tried warthog, and I've tried that kind of thing. And of course, all the plant food we've given to try, and the honey is amazing. But yeah. It's it can get pretty interesting. Their level of what's cooked is not the same as my level of what's cooked. But that's okay.
Medium rare.
Yeah.
You kind of like got to be a fly on the wall almost.
That's the idea. I mean, you don't fool yourself. You know that just by being there, you change things like anything else. But a couple of things to think about. It's not like they're trapped in ember either. They know about the outside world. It's I'm not sure if there's an equivalent in with any of the Aboriginal communities in Australia. But in the US, for example, we have communities of Amish and Mennonite farmers who are still farming the same way that they were in the 1600s when they first got here. And of course, there's been changes, and of course, they know about the outside world. But they're still riding horse and buggy around and farming with livestock, and so it's that kind of a thing. They're proud of their traditions. They hold on to them while the world changes around them. Mm-hmm. But you're not kind of telling them anything they don't know when you sort of show up and say, oh, tell them about the outside world, or show them a computer or something like that. They've seen all that stuff.
Do you ever think that the Hadza tribe would ever become sort of more modern, or do you think they just stay the way they are? No,
I think they will. It'll slowly change. Even in the last 10 years that I've been going there, I've seen changes. It's the villages are encroaching more into the land. That there's other tribal groups there that some that, for example, do have herds of cattle. You see more of them encroaching. And that's they're just doing their best as well. Everybody's kind of doing their best to make things work for them and their families. But it's interesting to see things change. So yeah, I would love to think that they'll hold on forever, But realistically, at some point, broad scale, it's gonna end, and they'll end up. I don't know. That story's been written. And it's a tragedy almost everywhere else it's been written. The Native American groups here in the States, they were hunting and gathering too. And we put them on reservations, and we totally ruined a lot of their cultures and stole land for sure. And that story is a pretty sad one. In Australia, I know that you guys have had your own issues culturally in that interaction. Yeah. And, I think the Hadza and a few other pockets of places where people are still living off the land and haven't been moved to villages yet. I think we have the chance to write that future and write it the way we'd like it to be written. Mm-hmm. Right. So we'll see. I hope we can do right by the Hadza. Not we, it won't be up to me, but as a species, I hope we can get it right, that we treat everybody well and make that happen in a better way than has happened traditionally.
I think there's definitely a lot of positives that do come with being more modern, but I also happen to believe that the way things have been done for them have worked for a long time. They seem to be happy with it. So I guess it's just being cautious of them and as a people, and not making the same mistakes that we've made in the past.
Yeah, well, exactly.
In other tribes. Yeah. But how have the Hadza people taught you about the misunderstood nature of our metabolism?
Oh, well, that's one of the most fun pieces of the research I've done the last 10 years, at least. So I started working out there in 2009 and 10. with Brian Wood, like I said, and Dave Reichland. And the whole goal was to measure how many calories a day you burn. Very simple question, right? How many calories do you burn every day if you're a hunter-gatherer? Mm-hmm. And nobody had ever measured humans in a hunting and gathering community before. And it's a really critical piece of information because we were all hunting and gathering. Everybody on the planet was hunting and gathering just a few thousand years ago. And so that's the way that we've evolved. And that's the context you want to understand our species. Great. So we finally got funding to go do it. And we were sure, because the Hadza are so incredibly active, and women get 13,000 steps a day on average, men get 19,000 steps a day on average. It's a ton of activity. Of course, they're going to burn tons more calories. We just wanted to know how many more. What was the deficit between us in the industrialized world and them? And so we went out there with all the latest kit and the best ways to measure energy expenditures. We used isotope tracking techniques that measure it for a week, total average energy expenditure over the course of a week in 30 men and women in the Hadza community. Got the data back. It's a kind of, you get urine samples, you have to analyze the urine samples. We had to get all the data back home, back to the States, send it to a lab, got all the data back. And we were shocked to learn that it's the same as you and me, right? These guys are incredibly active. They get more activity in a day than most Americans get in a week. And yet, total calories a day, indistinguishable between Hadza men and women and folks here in the US and other industrialized parts of the world. So that was a total mind blower. That was like, what the hell's how do we misunderstand it so badly that we could be this surprised, right? Obviously, we were just completely wrong about how metabolism really works.
Why have we been wrong?
Yeah, well, I've been trying to untangle that in the last 10 years or so. And so the story continues to be written, but here's what we know so far. One is the reason that we were so sure that activity must be kind of driving the bus here with energy expenditure is that people had just always been estimating energy expenditures from activity, right? We didn't actually have a good way to measure energy expenditures outside of a laboratory until just a couple decades ago. These isotope tracking techniques are really the only way to do it. And those methods weren't available. And so people knew from laboratory studies that walking and running and other activities cost energy. Mm-hmm. And so they assumed that, then if I know how active you are, I can just kind of add up all the sums of how many hours you spent walking, running, whatever, and I add it all up, and that's your calorie expenditure. And there was no way to prove them wrong because nobody had done the measurements. And the other thing is, I think a lot of the work in metabolism came out of kind of perspective, which is has made so many big advances in medicine, but doesn't think about humans the way that I do. I was trained to think about humans as evolved organisms, and evolution can be tricky. And you expect evolution to be tricky because evolution doesn't care about having a bikini ready body for the beach, or even really necessarily about being particularly healthy. Evolution cares about having kids, right? And so you would expect an evolved organism to be very clever about how it burns its calories, and and to be dynamic in the way it responds to lifestyle and activity. Okay, so now let's back up a second and ask, how do we understand the Hadza results then? And that's what I think we come down to, that it isn't just activity driving the bus, that instead the body's being adaptive, being clever. And that's how you can have this seemingly impossible situation where these really active people have the same expenditures as really sedentary people, because they're spending their calories differently, more on activity, but less on other stuff. And it keeps the total numbers the same.
I wasn't that long ago that we actually had someone, I forgot who it was, who created the calorie. And then it's just been this massive thing in the health and fitness space where everyone's like calories in versus calories out. You got 20% versus 80%. They say 80% is diet, what you eat, 20% is exercise, that sort of thing. And you got these studies of people that have done, they've been on sort of a healthy diet and they've also reduced the amount of exercise they've done. They've still lost weight. Then you got the other people that have increased the amount of exercise they've done and then just continue to eat the same rubbish, and they haven't really lost as much weight and they feel 10 times worse as a result. So you got all those studies done, but it seems like I guess there's been a miscommunication somewhere about the calorie and what it actually is, like energy, expenditure, all that sort of stuff, which is another reason why I stopped tracking calories, because firstly, I got sick of it. And secondly, it just didn't match up for me.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's really hard to track calories in. First of all, people, even well-intentioned and well-informed folks, have a hard time tracking the calories you eat. It's just really hard to know because the food, the packaging label might be off by quite a bit compared to what's on the inside. Anyway, people digest foods a little bit better or worse, so there's that. But then on the energy that you burn, good luck, right? I mean, how would you know how many calories you burn? If you're not in a study, the kind of study that we run, I can tell you, you'd just be guessing, right? And so I think that's, I think moving away from counting calories, I understand that, and it makes sense to me as a strategy, because it can be really kind of feel like a fool's errand to try to keep track of them. It still is, and fundamentally, physics is still right. And every calorie worth of fat that you've got on your body is a calorie that you ate. I mean, that is just true. But yeah, keeping track of the accounting on that is not worth your time. It's better to focus on the foods the kind of quality of foods you eat. You should be active anyway. That's the way to go, I think. So
exercise is still important in terms of healthy lifestyle and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. And in fact, all the adjustments your body's making that kind of keeps your body burning the same number of calories if you're really active or not, those adjustments are probably part of the reason exercise is so good for you. You're burning less on stuff you shouldn't be burning on anyway, like inflammation, right? Stress reaction. We know that people who exercise a lot have lower inflammation levels. They don't react to stress as strongly, right? Their heart rates don't go up as high, and they come back down faster, for example. Your body's saving energy in these ways if you're someone who exercises a lot. And we think that that's kind of basically that's the mechanism by which your body adjusts. And these are all healthy things. Exercise is essential. Be really clear about that. But it doesn't work the way you think it does.
I guess you could have those people that would say, look, Herman, you've said that people such as the Hadza tribe, the men are doing 19,000 steps a day. I'm doing that in my life. And meanwhile, we're just burning pretty much the same amount of calories. So what's the point? What's the point in me actually exercising? Should I just remain on the couch and continue to burn the same amount as these active people? What would you say to those sort of skeptics, I think?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'd say you're misunderstanding how this works. Your exercise is the rhythm section of this vast orchestra that is your body. 37 trillion cells at work all day. And if you don't have physical activity and your muscles burning energy, pulling in nutrients, burning it up, if instead you've got all the other systems sort of flush with energy, actually burning all your energy, that's bad. There's no rhythm section. You get out of sync and you're going to get sick. And we know this. We know that from countless epidemiological studies, from randomized controlled trials, whatever level of evidence you'd like. If you don't exercise, if you're not physically active every day, as much as you can be, you're going to get sick. You're going to be much more likely to get heart disease, diabetes, all that stuff. So exercise is still essential. It doesn't change it at all. But I think what's neat about the work that we're doing is it kind of helps us understand why. Mm-hmm. And it's not the why that we've been told before, actually. And that's interesting. As a scientist, that's critical, because the way things work and how they work, that's where the gold is, right? That's where you're trying to figure out what's going on and how things work. That's the most fundamental kind of question you can ask in biology.
How about for those people that look at sort of DNA and body type? Do they matter as much?
So some of it's genetic. Yeah. So we know that, for example, your likelihood of becoming overweight or obese, it was what we'd call heritable. It runs in families, right? It is partly your genetics. Here's what's interesting. We can go a bit further. We can actually say, where are those genes most active? People have found about, I think it's close to 1,000 genes now, where, if you have this variant of the gene or that variant of the gene, you're more or less likely to have struggle with your weight. And each one has tiny effects. No allele is that important, but no gene is that important, but 900 of them. If you get a bunch of bad cards, then you have a hard time. If you get a bunch of good, anyway, that's how it works. The genes kind of all add up. All right. They've tracked down where these genes are active. Would you care to guess what tissues in your body, what organs in your body, these genes that make you likely to become obese are most active?
Let me guess, stomach.
Makes sense, right? That's where all the food goes. Nope, it's your brain.
Huh.
Every one of the genes, hundreds, that's been associated, figured out what tissues is it most active. They're most active in your brain, right? And that's why people are driven to overeat. And it's not that it's not a willpower issue, right? It's that, again, that mechanism, it's below your conscious level, that's matching intake and expenditure, right? That all that hardwiring is in your brain. And if you're just wired a little bit different, that reward versus, feeling full, that system is going to just be a little tilted. And in this weird food environment that we built for ourselves with all this crazy food that you can eat, that's so delicious and it doesn't ever make you feel full, you're going to struggle. Yeah. So you can't fix what's in the world around us too much, but you can fix what's in your cupboards at home. You can kind of fix what you can in your local environment. That's I think the best we can do.
I've heard you talk about how not including certain foods in your home as a way not to eat it, which I like. I actually employ that tactic at home too. So don't include ice cream at home, even though you love the stuff. Just, all those things that are very, very important in your weekly shop, not to include certain food groups, and you won't eat it.
Yeah, that's right. And it's hard too. Supermarkets are built to wear you down. They put you in the healthy part of the supermarket first, right? You have to walk through the veg, and you're making all these decisions about which ones you want. And then you're feeling good about yourself too, because you've got healthy food. And then you get to the end of the store and it's all the ice cream aisle. And your brain is tired of making decisions. It's called decision fatigue. And you're feeling good about yourself because you've got vegetables in the cart. So boom, right? You get the ice cream. They're not stupid. They know what they're doing.
So is it okay? I'm mindful of your time, Herman. I want to be respectful, but I've got a couple more questions for you. So is it, in terms of when choosing the right kind of diet and the food groups, is it more acceptable to say that we should decrease the amount of food groups that we have on any given day, like the Hadza have, or should we have more?
That's interesting. I would say the best rule of thumb to take with you to the supermarket is this: avoid overly processed foods. If it has an advertising campaign associated with it, it's probably not great. If it comes in a shiny package, it's probably not the best. That's thing one. Thing two is high protein and high fiber foods tend to be the most filling. There's a woman named Susan Holt, actually, who's an Australian researcher, who's done great work on this. You feed somebody the same amount of calories from different kinds of foods, and you ask them an hour later, do you feel full or do you feel hungry now? And you're most likely to feel full on foods that have high fiber contents and high protein contents. And you're least likely to feel full. In other words, you're most likely to feel hungry again if you've had, baked goods or, sweet processed food kind of stuff, the junky stuff, So, there's different ways to do that. You could go high protein. People go like low carb diets. Sometimes that works for people. That's great. Some people go plant-based and it ends up being more high carb, but more whole foods, fiber-based foods. There's a lot of ways to get there. But avoid the packaged stuff if you can.
Should we eat for weight loss, weight management, weight gain as well? What should we be eating for, or just overall health?
Yeah. I guess it depends on where you're at. If you are at a weight that's really unhealthy for you. BMI and your weight, it's just a number. It's only one data point in how healthy you are overall. I don't want to overstate it, but it is true that if you have obesity, you're much more likely to develop other diseases down the stream. So in that case, you probably ought to try to find a diet that you could lose a little bit of weight. And that would be a good idea. But if you're in a healthy weight, then eat for weight maintenance, right? So I think it depends on where you're at. And you never want to sacrifice, healthy, nutritious foods just, to be able to lose weight quickly, that kind of thing. I'd advise against that. I'm not a dietitian. I should say that. I'm an evolutionary biologist, right? So if you're getting your diet from an evolutionary biologist right now, but that's what I understand.
And you got all these, I guess, diets out there. You got paleo, you got keto, you've got vegan, you got carnivore, you got all these ones. I can't keep up, to be honest with you. Eat for overall health. I was curious in terms of the BMI construct. What's the safe BMI level?
I mean, there's no. It's somebody who's got a lot of muscle, for example, and low body fat will have a BMI that makes them look like the same weight person who's more fat than muscle. So it gets hard to say this one data point, that this one threshold is going to work the same for everybody. But if your BMI is over 30, especially if it's over 35, then you should have a long, hard think about if you're at a healthy place right now. Yeah. And again, it is only one data point. There are other aspects of health that are important. Fitness is super important. But it's the totality of things, and that's a really important one to look at.
Yeah. Two final quick questions for you.
Yeah, sure.
Firstly, before I ask them, where do you want people to find you, connect with you, buy a new book, all those wonderful things?
Well, they should buy Burn if they can, of course. And you can get that on anywhere you buy books. I mean, it's on Amazon, but it's other places too. I'm on Twitter at Herman Pontzer if you want to check me out there. If you want to go to my lab at Duke University, you can search us up pretty easy on the web that way and see what's on research-wise these days. I think that's probably the best way to do it. I
bought my copy of Burn a few weeks ago, by the way, and it still hasn't arrived. I think distribution issues, low stock, the whole thing. I'm like, come on.
Yeah, well, low stock's promising. That means everybody's buying copies.
Yeah, which is a good thing for you, right?
Yeah, right.
You want people to buy copies of your book.
Of course, I love it.
I've loved this conversation, Herman, but this is a question for the end. But what do you love the most about yourself and your story?
What do I love the most about myself? I'm not sure I can be outside myself enough to answer that question very well. All right, here's an answer. What I love about myself is that I have kept true to what I think is important. I haven't felt the need to kind of compromise on things that were important to me. And that's, the sort of values you internalize growing up in a small town. I've held on to a lot of that, and I'm proud of that. The stuff I learned from my parents, I've held on to that in friends, and I don't feel like I've had to sort of compromise or sacrifice, the values that are really important to me. I'll say that.
I love that answer. This is my all-time favorite question I ask all my guests at the very end. It is a hypothetical one, but I want you to imagine with me for a moment that you've been able to reach the age of 100. You've been able to study everything that you want, but your friends and your family have decided to put together a film for you of everything you've ever said and everything you've ever done. Don't ask me how in the world they got it all. We'll call it magic for the sake of argument, but they've been able to get it and show it to you on your 100th birthday. What do you want that film to say and to show about your life?
Wow. I want it to show that I've been curious and creative, and I've made contributions. I want to leave this world with footprints and fingerprints, here in terms of books and papers. And I like to build. I have a wood shop. I like to build stuff. I love to create, and I think that that's what we all owe each other and ourselves, is to get whatever that's inside of you and to get it out. And for me personally, as a scientist, I want to be doing that in a curious and creative way that takes ideas in new places and takes the research in new places. That's going to be the measure of my success. You asked me earlier about success, but that's going to be the measure of my success. Did I see the openings? Did I figure it out? Was I smart enough to understand where to go next? And I hope we have. It's been feeling pretty fun and pretty good so far. So hopefully we can keep it up and Yeah, that'd be great.
It's a great send-off message for people. Dr. Herman Pontzer, thank you so much for this great, wide-ranging, wide informative conversation. I've loved every single moment of it, learned a lot. But thank you so much for joining me today on the Storybox podcast.
Thank you. It was really fun.